dear Ambassador Alenka Suhadolnik, dear speakers, and audience members on site and online, good afternoon. I'm more than happy to welcome everyone to the Inside Out Art Museum this afternoon. And please allow me to introduce the Beijing Conversation series, which we had initiated with the Embassy of Slovenia in Beijing since last December. This project was almost 1 year in the making, and we were determined to bring together some of the most brilliant minds from Slovenia and China into conversation in Beijing. In the first event of this series, Professor Alenka Zupancic speaks about conspiracy theory and had a following conversation with Professor Zhou Jinghua. It was an extremely inspiring event. The two scholars had never met before, but got to know about each other's work and thinking through such an encounter. At a time of increasing tension among different political entities, we firmly believe the urgency to create more opportunities for dialogues among individual artists, intellectuals, and practitioners from varied disciplines in order to overcome misunderstandings and the lack of transparency. Before we go on with this afternoon's event, I would like to invite the ambassador to speak a few words to launch our conversation this afternoon. Ambassador, please.
Thank you, Claire. Good afternoon, everybody here present and also online. I'm truly happy that is the second edition of the Beijing Conversations, but also the first live edition. I do hope that more live editions are going to follow, although be aware, tomorrow a conversation between Zdenka Badovinac and Magda Lipska is still going to happen online. So join the museum and the project Beijing Conversations tomorrow at 5:30. Today, I'm particularly pleased that the guest and the speaker on the Slovenian side is Aleksandra Vajd. I know Aleksandra Vajd for a long time. We met while I've been serving in New York, and she was lecturing and she was on Fulbright scholarship in New York as well. So then somehow our conversation started. So our conversation started about 15 years ago, and I will be very happy to hear and you will also hear how her work developed in those last 15 plus years. Thank you.
Thank you. So when we launched this series, we were in the middle of COVID lockdown and expected most of the conversations to take place online. But like Ambassador was saying, it's a great surprise that we finally can have a live event on site with today's speaker, Aleksandra Vajd, and Zhou Dengyan, a scholar of film. So I will formally introduce both of them before I give the floor to them. Aleksandra Vajd holds BA and MA in photography from FAMU in Prague, as well as the degree from the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine in Ljubljana from 1997. From 2004 to 2006, she was the recipient of the Fulbright Scholarship to study photography at SUNY New Paltz, New York. Her work has appeared in numerous exhibitions. Vajd has been one of the official protagonists of the art scene in Slovenia and the Czech Republic. Therefore, the notions of displacement and transition have always marked her artistic practice. From 2004 to 2015, she worked in collaboration with Prague-based photographer Heinrich Elt. Their work together spanned the representational photography of their intimate lives and their relationship, to experimental practice, exploring and challenging the boundaries of the photography medium. Later on, Vajd continued her singular exploration of the image concerning the object, space, and materiality. Recently, Vajd has been focusing on reductive photography work, exploring the limits of the medium with the emphasis on materiality. Zhou Dengyan is an art historian with a research focus on photography in China. She holds a PhD in art history from Binghamton University. She is the editor of Images of China, 20th Century Chinese Photographers, Shi Shaohua, and the National Photography Art Exhibition Office, Reminiscences and Documentary Materials, 1972 to 1978. Her recent studies have been published in Literature and Art Studies, Theory and Criticism of Literature and Art, Chinese Journal of Art Studies, Contemporary Cinema, Trans-Asia, Photography, and so on. She is currently teaching at Beijing Film Academy. Zhou has won the China Federation of Literary and Art Circles Woodpecker Cup from the Excellent Chinese Literature and Art Review, and many other prizes. In today's conversation, both of them will give a 20 to 30 minute presentation. After that, they will have a conversation between each other, facilitated by me and hopefully joined by all of you. Without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Aleksandra Vajd. Please join me in welcoming her. Please.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for coming. Thanks for people present and people online. Yes, I prepared my presentation actually a few days ago, finishing it in the morning. So I will admit that I will go fast rewind and then fast forward. This is also how I call the presentation, because I will try to talk and synchronize with the visuals and my thoughts, and let's see if I manage. So maybe just few lines about what I'm interested in the medium of photography. Yeah, so basically I also realized that maybe over the past 20 years, I was not so much of a storyteller. Maybe during the school years, since I studied in Prague, and this actually happened after I finished my veterinary studies, and somehow subsequently I realized I'm never gonna do that practice. After serving some practice at the private clinic in Finland, I decided that maybe I should really change my profession and went to study photography in Prague. Prague at that time was actually a center for many people from ex-Yugoslavia to study film or camera or scenography or photography at the Academy of Film and Performing Arts, which is very famous. Also Miloš Forman, for example, or Kusturica or Agnieszka Holland study there. And there is as well like a department of photography. And this department of photography was very much oriented into kind of producing, if I can use this word, kind of modernist character of an artist, meaning someone who has like a significant handwriting, works in certain kind of style, very subjective documentary oriented photography, and also primarily black and white. And when I studied, actually was a really literally a crime to do color photography at that time. And but I actually took it very just as a very peculiar or special situation, since the school also offered a studio for foreigners, and we were a very special group of people. Usually every year new people came from states, from Nordic countries, from Italy, and so together mixing with the Czech students, this became a very special cocktail of relationships. So basically, this was my environment as well. Not to forget that after the Berlin Wall, after the transition into a new system in the 90s, the Prague place became very special and also a home for more than 200,000 Americans at the time, which also generated a very special microclimate. So as much as politically as much as in cultural scene. So maybe if you went through the points, I would like to begin with my first solo show after I finished the school. And this was a very bad photos, I'm sorry, but actually I got them from Modern Gallery because it actually happened in the small gallery of Modern Gallery in Ljubljana. And they actually took photos of reproductions because by then they were still producing only photos, so they didn't digitalize the archive or documentation of the exhibition. This space belongs to the bank today. I mean, it was also previously, but now it's in the realm of a bank who is curating actually very interesting shows. But back then it was a very good venue to actually present yourself, especially as an emerging artist. And I chose here work of, I've been for long, during my studies, photographing my parents. I realized that this was the best way how to communicate with them. And because this was somehow also excusing my decision changing from veterinary medicine into studying art, photography. And somehow I needed to have some kind of contact, and photography was immediate asset, or to get into their kind of engage them and to be interested in what I'm doing. So so during the course of my studies, I've been photographing my parents, and then when my father died, I actually I was at home in Slovenia and preparing one exhibition, and when he died, I went to say goodbye to the morgue and just actually in this moment I took as well the picture, but when I was then returning back to the material of my archive, into my archive, I realized I've been photographing my father constantly resting in at home, and I was somehow always stopped for a moment when I saw him sleeping or resting, and actually checking his chest if it's moving, as if he's breathing. And I was somehow anticipating his death by doing this, and I was not actually aware what I'm actually doing. But when I put together these 7 images, I actually realized what happened, and this is somehow, even though it's about my private life, even though this is my father, I'm talking about something very universal, which is death or life. And this also became for me maybe a platform on which I could start to create my work in a very conceptual manner. And not as a photographer who is looking through the window, observing reality and somehow serving the humankind its realistic character, or mimicking the reality with its character, but I was much more interested in conceptualizing basically my world and surrounding and my thoughts. So after the school, I actually got together with the Czech artist, and he was also my schoolmate, and we became a couple. And somehow it just became supernatural that we started to take pictures of each other. And we took very immediate portraits of each other, which actually became a sort of a exercise through which we could question and develop and exercise various things with the medium of photography. We would be both photographers, meaning also we are as well photographed, but at the same time we are photographed. And we are subject, but then we are also the actors behind the camera. And also, if I am a subject in front of the camera, I'm as well a photographer at the same time, meaning that I'm also aware that he's taking a picture, and also I'm aware of his vision or of his act of being a photographer, taking picture of a subject, of a person in front of the lens. And like this, somehow we started to also test various forms of presentation of the medium, meaning book, which is a very special and very immediate thought how to compile a body of work, meaning photographic body of work, since this is something that it's easily distributed, easily handed, and also conceived. And as well, the book itself can act as an artifact itself. Also this work existed in a web page where it was generating the portraits. So we actually compiled, I don't know, more than 100 couples, meaning like myself and him. We were both taking images with different kinds of cameras. This was also very important because he's using a square format, I was using a rectangular format. So I was talking also through this choice of the format, we were talking also about the medium, also about the technology. And then later, this very simple observation of each other also became conceptualized. So here is maybe an example when the stack of photos is actually the stack of our portraits, but then on top we are actually mimicking the act that is actually happening in front of the camera. Even though that this now is becoming documentation or reproduction of an act, but it's a photograph also on its own. And this actually served as some kind of like conceptualizing and also talking about postmodern idea of art at that time, meaning like authorship, singularity, sexual identity, authorship, I said it I guess, yeah, simulacrum, text in the image, and all the questions that were actually at stake at that time. Here we see, this is called, here also I need to say, I'm not putting any dates, but this is 2004-5, and here it's important always the title of the work. The title also always triggers the understanding of the work. This work is called Two Sides of One Story, and the piles we saw here, at a certain moment we cut it through it, and this is the picture we get when we photograph this. But this is not important how it's done, it's important what it is. And we see here two sides of the same pile just being divided, but again, we are still talking about the portraits of two people. And then this somehow we kept on continuing. Left one is called Colorblind, the other one Blind Spot. So, so basically, this is somehow, I will maybe speed it up. And then actually this project also offered us, this project we understood really as a garden, you know, like somehow this was really always project on the side, even though that we became then pretty much known of this project because we've been creating numerous books. We had like, I think we created 5 different kinds of books whenever, and always when we did a book, it was always different layout. We were trying to differently conceptualize how the book can be also built. How 2 images which are repeating can be newly repositioned. So it really like was kind of practicing, you know. And then these kind of methods we were implying into other work, like which we were interested in. At that time, actually, we moved to States, since we both got Fulbright scholarship, and at the same time, so we moved to upstate New York, and being within New York University, at New Pulse, so this offered us somehow also completely different milieu for the artists, where actually the whole environment became very inspiring for us, because suddenly we were liberated from context which was usually given in Europe by the nation, by history, by politics, and suddenly we became really like free from all those obstacles, free from storytelling, free from like conditioned, yeah, free from his art history, which is in, for example, if you look at European art, very much embedded in the story and in the work itself as well. So this offered us just like examining different kinds of ideas, looking in complete, like we could return totally in the beginning, you know, like, okay, so when is the first, where the first image was made? It was the cave. We are looking from the cave outside, creating the framework that it's changing or not changing. So, and then also at the same time, we became, or myself, I became super aware of like one special movie, which actually triggered for me pretty much my thinking about the medium, which was a Harun Farooqi movie from '84, which is called I'm Built, One Image. And actually Harun Farooqi is filming in a documentary manner work of a photographer, creating the set, photographic set for one image for the magazine Playboy. And for me, somehow this was very interesting because suddenly we are not looking at an image, we are just looking at what is behind the image, even though we were all the time aware of its creation. But suddenly the photography for me turned into itself, yeah? So I suddenly became a subject matter for me. And I was, as I said in the beginning, I'm not a photographer who looks through the window, but I'm a photographer that is actually looking into the reflection of the window, not in a sense of being subjective, but pretty much like using the medium as a focus of interest, as a focus of examination. What everything it is, what everything it was, and what can it become. Here I would then also say that at a certain moment I realized that photography is not anymore imprisoned in a frame. So suddenly it got a tendency to step from the wall, step out of the frame and move into the space. And this is very interesting moment because then suddenly it started to act differently. So how does it act? It acts as an image, as an object. It's not anymore a flat image behind the frame, which is completely imprisoned and defined by the frame in a given space, meaning the gallery space, for example, or let's say a book. But suddenly here, a photograph being put like as an object, we suddenly lose the frame. So suddenly the frame is the space, it's the gallery, is the building, is the city, is the country, is the, you know. So for me it became really interesting, what is then the frame to the image. And then also with this kind of thinking, this is still collaboration. We also started to work in the space. So basically that we conceived the exhibition not anymore a work of art, but the work of art was an exhibition itself. So exhibition becomes a medium. So basically also every exhibition became unique setup, yeah. So it was always made for this particular space, always adopting also to gallery space, which usually, I mean, if you would, if some of you were in Europe, we are usually, the galleries very rarely are built, newly built buildings. We are usually not we, but the galleries are usually in buildings that were before, for example, serving a different purpose, or are they so old, so the conditions are always in a certain manner historical conditions. So I always need to also take into consideration architecture of the gallery space, their walls, their floors. So like this also, this whole thing also, of course, conditions my work itself. And then we also did various experiments. For example, we moved into the gallery space and we created for 3 weeks weather conditions which were typical for that climate, meaning in Prague. So we were like recreating rain, clouds, sunset, sunrise. And this was also a very interesting process, because suddenly you're occupying the gallery not with an artifact, but with your act, with your performance. The exhibition then opened only for one day, only for one evening, when we already produced a limited edition of artist book of all the images, which were not actually which were not documentation of this, but they were pictures themselves. Yeah, so this is also very interesting. You know, when is the image an artifact? When is the image? And this is very blurred also in my work. If you would see that, you don't know if the image is documentation of something or it's an image itself. Yeah, is this clear somehow? Yeah. So then, after our collaboration somehow stopped with Hynek, I had the tendency to, this was a very particular time, yeah, so we were also photographers of a very special period, meaning that when analog actually started to go into digital, this was really the breaking point. And also when we got to States, which was super interesting, all the studios and labs were transformed from analog into digital. So they were canceling dark rooms, they were canceling work in the dark room, and emphasizing computerizing and digitalizing the photographic processes, meaning buying scanners, you know. So this is constant dialogue also with technology, which is very, very interesting. So also, like, I would like to make you aware that my fast rewind is actually going to serve now to, in a way, make it palpable, visible, or I will try, I'm trying to explain you the timeline of the medium itself, which is super interesting, because this timeline of the media is also showing us its development. Somehow this chronology is interesting, not just because I would like to say, oh, this was in the 90s, this was in after millennium, or this is like now. I think this is already imprinted in what you are looking, you know, into the material, into the way I'm actually acting in the space, and what is my interest, because I'm also very reactionary and very symptomatic to the changes that are actually happening in the contemporary times. So after our collaboration, which was super post-conceptual, because also I admit we were also very much influenced by the space in which we were actually grown as an artist, where we were, I don't know, consuming the art, it was the dialogue with the art scene. We became also professors at the academy, which is Academy of Architecture, Art and Design in Prague. This means 2008 we started to teach. So actually parallel also my artistic career goes also with my academic career, which today I would not be that artist if I would not also teach. After our separation, I realized that I was really missing contact to the material, because digitalization also meant that you are photographing on digital camera, you are sending JPEGs, you are all the time working with a computer, we are just sending it and you are getting printed image, you are getting it framed, and you know, I'm missing all this process in between. So I realized, wow, I need to go back, I need to actually go and touch, I need to close myself in a dark chamber and see where we are at the moment with the, where we can still, and how actually media can still somehow reinterpret itself. So for me also it was very important that after 15 years working with Hynek art, I realized I need to again develop my own language, my own alphabet. So what is my alphabet? So I went into completely the most basic elements, meaning like I just took paper and then I took chemicals and color, and of course geometrical forms. And I started to experiment. It was not really an experiment somehow. All these things, they maybe look very modernistically, but this also was very much for me a reaction to the period, because there was a proliferation. We were all moving on Instagram. We were all like taking thousands and millions of images, which we upload every minute. So for me, this was like, wow, okay, so let's completely see how I can talk about the same things, but with complete abstraction, with complete reduction of the meaning or of narration. So I invented this. There are photograms. These are photograms, meaning this is photographic paper. Photo paper, which is exposed in the darkroom, which follows its standardized format in photography, which you will later see. I was also not in the beginning so much, but later I was really suffering quite a lot, or it was also my dialogue, with the standardized sizes, which come from the producer that produces the photographic paper. And also, I must say also that black and white photography really didn't somehow, it didn't become obsolete, or it wasn't in decline, but it was somehow through a strange way coming back. But I was not interested in nostalgia for it. I was not interested in this grain or, this kind of moody images being comparable to some kind of impressionism or something. But I was interested, like, how can now black and white photography be interesting, again, and what I can do with it. So I use these simple forms, and I started to basically here there are a few things, technical things that I kind of invented, yeah. So this is like that I exposed, for example, from 2 to 10 papers, photographic papers at the same time, which before was not happening. You never saw images being exposed at the same time. Then as well, I've been creating certain kind of forms and shapes on the paper, and you see black and white surfaces. Photographic paper has its ability because its surface is light sensitive, meaning it's coated with light sensitive emulsion, and because of that has a potentiality something to happen, that something is there even though we don't see it. So when we have black surface, this means that this black surface was exposed, was touched, was something happened there, yeah, because I developed it and then fixated it, but there is no image, but we can perceive it on completely imaginative level, yeah. And even to emphasize this idea or this kind of principle, I also gave name to each unit that you see. Each unit got a name, and the name I borrowed from 36 dramatic situations, which Georges Polti came up with in 19th century, while actually examining the Greek tragedies and then contemporary literature, and he actually observed and analyzed that in all those human situations, there is not more and not less than 36 dramatic situations that can occur between people. And also his theory then became in a catalog or index for writers, for theater people, because they can just use it, each number has its own name, meaning deliverance, aggression, self-sacrifice for love, etc. And basically all those units got this name, and suddenly looking at this, basically, and looking and knowing also the whole technological process and thinking behind the black image, the black surface can actually reveal some kind of human drama that happened, because there might be an image, but we can't see it. And then, of course, these photograms, for me, became flat sculptures. I started to treat them as flat sculptures. So they started, there was a need for them to invent a pedestal for them. So here we go back into objecthood, yeah? So, I started to create these kind of pedestals, which were then, and treating them in different ways, of course, again, according to the setup in the gallery space. This is a Rudolfinum, it's a very, I don't know, established gallery space in Prague. I created this huge together with Aneta Monakisha. This is actually the name that I will also mention later on. We here started to collaborate on the first project, meaning like we created just a setup for the photograms. And the setup was pedestals plus the verticality of the really like 6 meter long fabric, which became actually, it's mimicking, it is holding the character of the photograms as well, but in these boxes that you see, it's actually the moving image. So the only palpable, the only material elements in the whole exhibition were these photograms, which were, of course, again, very abstract, while the works in the black boxes were works of other artists like Hito Star or Anna Dovchikova or who else was there? Andriy Sala. Oops. And then, and this is just like an image of, again, you know, it's in the documentation, but it also is a photograph, but then also it's a collage. And it's actually trying to guide us to the setup that happened. This is Cukrarna, it's a Kunsthalle, newly built exhibition space in Ljubljana, where actually the photograms became much more like a situation, started to really function as a sculpture. Aneta Monakisha is a Romanian artist living in Prague, and herself, she's based in sculpture practice, and her quality also is nothing is too big, or it's in a certain way. For me, this helped a medium of photography, which is standardized format, to expand. So always, also for me, the dialogue means with another artist as much as with Hinek and Aneta, and then you will see later also with Jimena Mendoza, a Mexican artist, meant also not only expansion of my own personality, but also my own work. So here, after we collaborated with Aneta just in our architecture kind of setup, we decided that we are going to do an exhibition together, conceived it together. Still, as a base was serving us a photogram. But suddenly this photogram became completely in the background, not really in the background, but just as some kind of initiator of the whole installation. So we see photograms which are using the pedestals, big flat TV screens, which are just turned on the monochromatic color. As well, we are somehow cutting through the paper and examining what are the properties of that photographic paper. Here it's becoming even more abstract, yeah, and somehow I'm combining analogy to this would be something as a slice of a tissue, so histology as well as physiology of the medium, and as well our archaeology of the medium, because what you see on the images already here, it's a mural, but the mural is made from photochemicals, and the photochemicals are thoughtfully selected through the study of all archaic photographic techniques from the beginning of its invention. So what we need to know also here at that point is that photography existed for many years before it was actually declared as an invention in 1839. But what actually launches medium of photography is its chemical discovery. Meaning that when we could fixate, first develop the image and then fixate the image, we would declare it as medium of photography, as an invention. And this was happening parallel through Talbot, Daguerre, and Nipze. And so we used, salt processes, albuming process, calotypy, cyanotypy, and actually we painted with all the chemical substances on the wall. The form that you could see there, it has a shape. Maybe in the bigger image you could see maybe more. Here, this form is not just coincidence. It's not just plain shape or aesthetics, but it's actually combining all the curves of different photographic light-sensitive emulsions being produced in a manufacturer, and we just took those curves and we compressed them into where they intersect, and this became then as a base for our mural. And then I actually even wanted to push it more, and I wanted to see, so how do I even more expand? So I invited 4 more artists to join me at my solo show, which was a group show, but in a way I wanted to test if it's possible to somehow make a exhibition that would act as being a result of one artist, but actually we were 5. And here it went even further more into a reduction. So basically the only actors, and of its materiality, the only actors on the exhibition were just photographic materials, meaning photographic backgrounds. I think I used 7 different photographic backgrounds. Only 5 different gray colors, for example, that it's used for photographing. I don't know, when you go to the photographer's studio, so this is what you see, photographic background on which we place object portraits or scenography, or we inscenate some kind of situation. And then I used filters, which we also use, which you could have seen previously already, because filters are very important as well, mediator, and also it's filtrating in a certain way the sun rays, and like this conditioning also how the photographic emulsion is exposed and treated. And then as well I used unexposed photographic long papers. So these walls are, we created big walls in the space, changing space completely into immersive space. They are almost 5 meters high. Some papers, photographic papers, you could see they're also like using different surfaces, matte surface, glossy surface, etc. And at the same time, the painting you saw before on the wall somehow leaked down on the floor. So suddenly became a painting on the floor. And with all this is also, like everything is like merging, reacting, exposing. So basically, this whole space which you see and that you could walk through is actually mimicking the material itself, yeah. And suddenly, when you come to the last room, you see kind of laboratory diorama, kind of situation where you can see actually what before you've been walking through. So also all those exhibitions, it's not only that you are looking at something, but you are also experiencing it through the walk, through the smell, through the touch, through the choreography of the viewer. And all those chemical processes on the floor somehow are also becoming an images later on. So then, as I said, my collaborations, I'll go really fast. It's the last chapter I have. So I really like to collaborate, and collaborations are different. So here I'm somehow combining and putting into dialogue image with an image. On the left side is Marketa Otova, and we did this exhibition in Glasgow, a photographic gallery. I will just go fast through. And then another collaboration happened with Mexican artist mentioned before, Jimena Mendoza. She's based in ceramics, and I was really interested how photography merges, marries to ceramics. So this became a very interesting collaboration. Also, I call those kind of human unfriendly objects. Basically, objects are on one hand paper and on another hand a piece of ceramics, but put together are forming a sculpture. But the sculpture always is in certain kind of dependency. One would not exist without another one, saying it more poetically. But also, it's not just that we are putting it together, this is also glued together, so they are really actually, forever. But for me, this was very interesting because, as I'm saying forever, I'm talking about temporality here. Also, like for me, it was super interesting, like how two different matters are having different temporality, because paper is much faster degrades or vanishes than ceramics, for example. So then we repeated another show, which we went even further. We used the method of dialogue so that one was mimicking another. Basically, we produced two identical, not identical, but we were trying to produce identical objects. So one was working on each, and then we put them into combination, and as well with the photograms, which also became part of it. And the photograms themselves were actually holding a shadow imprint of the object itself. This I would also admit somehow I was interested in Shenzai method, yeah, like I was really interested, like, and fascinated with this idea of copy and original, yeah. So here is also like, there we have two pieces, so what is another one copy, or which one is original? So, but both are originals and both are copies at the same time. So, and then these are the photograms, meaning I was also placing them. And so it's kind of nice because this kind of collaboration also then generates different kinds of work, And I was completely not aware, like I was just putting these objects on the paper and not knowing what actually should come out of it, and so. And then also here is super important, the text, which I actually also I like to treat the text as an equal partner in the exhibition, not only as some kind of supportive structure to it or just something that explains or something. And then we go to a collaboration with Anita Monakisha again, but here we've been completely started with photography. We were just photographing. We were interested in non-human entities and how can we actually change the forest into a photographic studio. And then these images were serving us. Only we actually didn't produce any images. They are just digital format, and we only communicated with them on the Instagram. But then somehow we realized, okay, how do we expand these images? So we started to construct sculptures from them, and these sculptures are coming from these images, and you can see many different decisions taking. They're also painted with asphalt, then also laser cut on foam, and then image printed on a fabric, then covered with plexi, so kind of, yeah, thank you. And I hope someone will come in the interview.
Yeah, please go.
Thank you everyone for coming, and audience and colleagues here and online. And I would like to draw your attention from Aleksandra's, who introduced a lot of her work, and for conceptual and contemporary non-human entities of photography, the medium, to its human and storytelling history in China. And it's my great honor and privilege to have the opportunity to share my work here. And I'm going to start with a brief introduction, a review about the exhibition I curated with Carol last August. And drawing from the works from the exhibition, I want to unfold the complexity of photography's truth claim at the heyday of socialist realism, and evaluate its legacy in relating to contemporary photography practice in China. So this exhibition, entitled Infinite Realism, is a survey project. It traces the emergence of alternative realist practices that challenge the formula of socialist realism, foregrounding the humanistic vision of the artists as observers and participants of momentary social upheavals through the camera lens. By questioning the rigid assumption of realism, we explore various initiates and contingent motivations embedded in the cultural apparatus of photography. As I post here, that font's changed. As I post here, this exhibition contains photographic works presented by more than 150 photographers, as well as a considerable amount of documentary materials. It can be regarded as one of the most comprehensive research exhibitions on Chinese photography in recent years. To feature the practical path of photographic realism in China, this exhibition highlighted the historical period of Chinese reception of socialist realism and its indigenization and saturation ranging from the 50s to the 70s. And these 3 decades saw the extent to which socialist realism as a methodology took place in the photographic society, while at the same time the occasional appearance of limited diversity of subject matters and forms of expression reflected the moments of political loosening in the cultural realm. A revisiting of Mao's era helps audience to reload what has long been missing in the historical narratives of modern Chinese arts, and more importantly, to bridge their knowledge gap between the past and the present, both conceptual and practical. After 1949, it was obvious that officially sectioned photography was obligated to represent the aspirations of the new society and to impart socialist consciousness to a population still recovering from years of wars and chaoses. Far from passive recipients, acclaimed photographers who were recruited into the new party states, cultural institution, showed at the first place genuine enthusiasm towards the promising potentials in their professional life. The Shanghai photographer Zhang Xueben, for instance, and he was one of them, and he had been well known in the Republican era for his exploration and ethnographic photographs of the Sino-Tibetan frontiers. In 1950 to 53, he served as an official photographer for the new government's visiting missions to ethnic groups' regions. There is an obvious stylistic adjustment in his mission works if you compare those to those he made in the 30s. That's the upper line. And what interests me here is not the new look of men and women who were represented as restless contributors to the new society, but is how genuine socialist hopes were romantically and enthusiastically performed by photographers even before the doctrine of socialist realism were officially enshrined in the photographic society. So in the elsewhere, I have argued that in the late 40s, a new realist appeal of photography emerged at the communist basis, featured by the so-called ideological property, 思想性, that replaced factual documentation to become the first and primary criterion for photographic work. What remained unsolved among the communist practitioners by the time was the rigidity of formal expressions and urgent demands for new style references. The incorporation of experienced civilian counterparts like Zhou Xueben, therefore, born pragmatic expectations. An abundance of evidence testifies to a genuine empathy with politics of infrastructural changes and creative enthusiasm. Zhou Xueben shared his impression of revisiting the ethnic group residence areas between 1950 to 52. So I just put it there, and you can read to save our time. So in his capacity as witness to the institutional transformation, the photographer was expected to record what he had seen for both his compatriots and foes. Yet this recording should not be done from the standpoint of an observer, but with the passion of a comrade in arms and assistant who devoted himself for a better life for the new nation. Zhou Xueben continued ethnographic project in the 1950s, but the image witnessed a rapid change of the ethnic groups from a primitive lifestyle towards modern. And as the photographer himself would exclaim, quote unquote, "I would never believe the miracle if I had not witnessed it." So no matter conscious or not, his reminiscences, written in 1957, catered to the new party state's progressive viewpoint of social development. And it is important to point out that during the second half of the 1950s, there were two politically orientated cultural campaigns that drove all cultural workers to re-evaluate the Stalinist Soviet model. One was the 100 Flowers Blossom, initiated in 1956, and the other was the Great Leap Forward in 1958. On the one hand, socialist realism was reasserted to be the orthodox of art making, while on the other, artists were encouraged to explore new techniques, skills, and new forms of expression. The contradiction lies in how to understand the reality in the revolutionary development faithfully, concretely, and historically, and how such an abstract direction could be applied to practice in real life. For instance, what kind of reality is artistic reality, and what can be the subject of historically concrete in art depiction? Different interpretations from essays published at the time indicates confusions and doubts about dominating the socialist spirit over the principles of typicality granted by classical Marxist theory. And what was not immediately visible by then was the exclusion of artistic individuality and subjectivity, which was soon replaced by interim cultural policies. Domestic criterions became apparent in the re-examination of the Soviet model regarding subject matters and political correctness as the leading standards for art criticism. When these standards were applied to practice, how to differentiate realism from naturalism became the major issue for both critics and artists. In the article entitled "Artist Realism is Not Factual Documentation," the portrait painter Lü Enyi, he opposed artistic creation against photography. And this opinion came from a Soviet writer named Wolf, I didn't get the full name, who regarded naturalism as to deal with reality by first impression. For both, the most obvious characteristic of naturalism in practice was to reject generalization, which means to refuse to search truth through complex interaction of self-consciousness and the outside world. So in this regard, to photograph was no more than recording and factual telling, which should be counted as naturalism. Such a mechanical understanding placed the photographer into an interesting situation. In order to acquire thematic generalization, the photographer had to actively intervene, make plans, and arranging everything before pressing the button. So orientated by socialist realism aesthetics, photography was therefore doomed to be a creative medium rather than a tool of reproduction, while visual reconstruction was the basic method for painters. It pushed photographers to concentrate on pre-shooting arrangements such as on-site staging and light setting. But this change was crucial for photographers working in the mass medium because they now encountered a new conception of photographic reality, no longer guaranteed by the old saying of seeing is believing. Instead, their task now turned from on-site observation and interview to the creation of progressive forms of life to create an illusion of planned reality, in other words, an ideal. The famous work against the land law taken by Qi Guanshan in 1950 exemplified how a veteran war photographer managed to meet new conditions of generalization. And this work is widely discussed in Chinese photography book, being regarded as a vivid contrast of the two hostile classes and reversal of their social status resulting from the land revolution. And some scholars would place it sixth composition with an effect of dramatic conflict, while others consider it as a typical visual representation of hatred aesthetics. Yet, how the photograph was made remained unclear until a Russian director released a documentary series in 2019. And this documentary comes out from about 200 boxes of color footage made by a group of 17 cinematographers sent by Stalin to China in 1949 to 50. Their task was to film the founding ceremony of the new China, but the series also features street scene in Beijing, Shanghai, and Guangzhou, etc. So a comparison of Qi Guanshan's photograph and the documentary stills. This is the guy who in Qi Guanshan's photograph. So I will go. So if we compare the stills, suggests a different intention towards towards the characters involving in denunciation. While the Soviet counterparts prefer close shot to emphasize the accuser's anger and the landlord's embarrassment, the Chinese photographer chose the old peasant with tattered outfit and among the accusers, capturing the moment of his hatred for staring at the landlord. One might argue that the Soviet counterparts provide a viewpoint from curious spectators, while Qi Guanshan finalized his ideal image of the class relation already formed by his years-long reception of land revolution at the base areas. So if we classified against the land law to the work of visual reconstruction of the recent revolutionary past, the devotion to Huangshan mountain landscape in late 50s to early 60s reveals an effort to inscribe a sense of scientific realism to the traditional form. Heavily influenced by the traditional landscape painting, aesthetics, photographers since the turn of the 20th century have been attracted by Huangshan Mountain for its strange peaks, old pine trees, and cloud seas. Lang Jingshan, for example, took Huangshan as his source bank in the 1930s and developed his signature pictorialist style, which he called composite photography, and that is to assemble photographic fragments and combines them as to be a seamless landscape in the dark room. So in the late 50s, in response to the loosening cultural policies, Huangshan photographs returned to the public circulation. Most of the works, however, strive to explore photography's optical principles to the extreme rather than paying attention to post-production techniques. Their preference of colors, small apertures, and wide angle and telephoto lenses, and the speed of photographic moments, and the display of modern buildings and tourists in significant place, all indicates a conscious intention to liberate Huangshan photographs from mimicking Chinese traditional painting style. So with this effort, Huangshan production appeared as a new kind of landscape that relied on the single linear perspective, emphasizing on the visual outcome of photography. So these images, as commented by Deng Tuo, then the chief editor of Renmin Daily, and in his review to Huangshan Landscape Photography Exhibition in 1961, I quote, "These Huangshan images have surpassed any previous paintings and expand the audience vision on the mountain stature and their complex textures," end quote. So the inscription of scientific realism to landscape scenery, therefore, is cloaked in the perfume gown of romantic aesthetics. In the Infinite Realism exhibition, we've tried to manifest Huangshan as a multifaceted metaphor. It fits the pursuit of the sublime and magnificent in the socialist context. But it is also a theme for those who seek to improve practical techniques and skills. The landscape naturalize the inherent power relations and politics. I also want to point out that the complex relationship of photographer, camera, and scenery. The photographic representation of Huangshan is not limited to a rationalist landscape way of seeing, which separates the photographer as subject from the landscape as object. Instead, it reveals the photographer's self-struggle of being and becoming to some extent. And so this painting by Jing Shisheng, the paintbrush in Dreamland, combines a twin-line Huangshan scenery with the artist's calligraphic brushwork and his recreational seal at the bottom on the right. And this work engender a way of looking that demonstrates man in control of the camera, but denied by the photographer himself. As stated in his poem written at the right age, he gives credit to the wonder of nature per se. And this hermeneutic mediation that serves as a disruption of the self and as constructive input of self at the same time. And here's another example, both work by Chen Bo. He was then the deputy secretary of China Photography Society, and he did these two works during his sick leave to Huangshan for recuperation. While the left one belonged to the progression of scientific realism we just talked about, the right one mimicked the traditional painting style. And it was not published in the 1960s, but it's one of the photographer's favorites, which might refer to his hidden wish to escape from the quotidian world and find a sanctuary from chaos. we might say that photography brings a perceptive revolution, but landscape can exist as a concept for either idealized and subjective or surprisingly private and intimate. And the third approach I want to, this is my last, the third approach to declare visual reality during the socialist era can be characterized as the photographer's bodily engagement to defense photography's documentary properties. We know that since Chairman Mao delivered his talks at ANR in 1942, the value of art creation turned from self-sufficiency and commodity to the importance of mass medium and the political importance of artistic form and the transformation of the individual mind through physical labor. After 1949, the political significance of the talks increased enormously in its enshrinement to a comprehensive policy for all cultural workers, diminishing its utilitarian purpose to go deep into the real life, to be an empty slogan. I argue that the call for reviewing the Soviet model during the second half of the 50s enabled this pragmatic approach to reset into the Chinese socialist context. Tensions between state socialism and the socialization of subjectivity, between accelerated productivity and socialist ideal of emancipation without drudgery, are most vividly dramatized. Accordingly, labor work occupied a crucial place in visual representation. Going deep into the real life at this time was received not only to be a native-born and well-experimented process to reach mass audience, but also a reliable one for photographers to identify shooting subject matters and to evaluate their work. What could be counted as real was associated with the photographer's bodily engagement, which means the photographer's working, eating, and staying with the working masses for a certain time. And in this way, the photographer could suppose to know them better, experience their everyday life, and produce works they welcomed. From this aspect, photographic reality lies not so much in the frame or merely in the life of the masses, but rather in the photographer's close interaction with his or her subject and the conceptualization and polishment of the raw materials from their mutual life. Here, life down to the grassroots was given the priority to ensure photography's truth claim, and yet the concept of life for the photographer was a kind of living art, thus highly poetic and expressionist rather than realistic. While the bourgeois romanticism of the individual was replaced by the romanticism of the collective, it was always strengthened by the question of whether political radicalism could be used as an art theory. And this difficult problem remained unsolved for photographic practitioners to deal with the gap between everyday reality and the ideal. And this work comes from a 10-year project, Red Flag Kennel by Vajd, Zhou, a photojournalist from the party organ of Henan province, this kennel launched by an impoverished local village. And the project was started in 1960 and finished in 1969, or done by local villagers, labor teams. And there's no machine aid, so the total length of the kennel is 1,500 kilometers. So that exemplifies Mao's strategy to conquer nature and harness nature. It was also a time when the true combination of revolutionary realism and revolutionary romanticism reached its height in the cultural realm. So the photographer, he lived and worked in Zhou, the capital city in Henan province, but it's about more than 200 miles away from the construction, but he identified it as like his most important project and traveled back and forth about 100 times to interview each significant improvement. So this work beautified the most dangerous activity by the hazard investigation vanguard. Once a spot of the peak was exploded, these vanguard villagers would come down from the top with a rock and to clear the unstable rocks, otherwise they will fall down and hurt the people down at the bottom. So to acquire this shot, the photographer robbed himself and stood on the hill near the vanguard for 2 hours, and his lens focused on their hard work, self-reliance, and unselfish devotion for the collective gain, which were exactly the romantic revolutionary spirit propagated by the Socialist Party state. Although during this construction, accidents occurred and caused injury and death. So today, this canon can go and visit, and stands for the totem for the socialist spirit. So are the value of Vajd's photo series. In the rest of the time, I would like to share some of my comments, not that mature, on the legacy of Chinese socialist realism in relating to contemporary photography practice in China. And socialist realism has usually been criticized for maintaining the veneer of realism, but generally abandoning its underlying vision. Such accounts, however, presupposed a hierarchy of realities and downplay socialist realism and its outcome as if they are useless production of false ideology. As I have shown in the case of photography, socialist realism has never been a monolithic art form, just as there has never been a monolithic belief in the photograph as incontrovertible vehicle of truth. It is the emergence of a new discourse in response to post-revolutionary circumstances that put revolution and Chinese socialism in a new perspective, a perspective from which the past must be configured into a totalistic other and estranged from the present. It is precisely when socialist realism disappears in this historical narrative that it becomes a cultural and political problematic. I don't argue against the teleological uniformity of social realism and its oppressive effect. Rather, I want to call attention to the indigenous tradition of the Chinese mass audience and the unique social and cultural environment to which Chinese socialist realism art has been constituted and has its own ends. Not to recognize this most defining feature is to fail to perceive its historical function. And this viewpoint would allow us to see the effects of the efforts in the reform era that sought to integrate the apparently negative institutionalized modes of socialist realism with the restoring of traditional aesthetics and the lowering of Western discourses in a revisionist way. Therefore, we see the emergence of two fashionable photography characteristics from the early 80s and their significant occupation in official sanctioned exhibition and publication up to date. One is the landscape genre, which has been ubiquitous among amateur photography. It's arguable that it was the state's aesthetic infiltration built in the heyday of socialist realism that grants the popular dimension of post-socialist photography culture. The second and more influential genre is what I call the snapshot of the social life, which is preferred to title as documentary photography by their practitioners. It promotes returning to the real plots and emotions of social life, emphasizing photographers' role as bystander. It believes that photographic authenticity relies on the mechanism of the medium, Both official organizations and individual practitioners recognize the humanistic rhetoric of documentary as morally and technically convincing, but serving a conceptual and practical distinction from the theory of reflection and the socialist realism formula. It's worth noting that although ideology no longer serves as the sole criterion of authenticity and the myth of historical truth is dismantled, in search of real and social importance of art within a broad humanistic understanding has remained to be one of the most respectable pursuits among Chinese practitioners. This obsession with the social role of photography, therefore, remains firmly within the stream of humanist Marxism. For me, this vein is very much rooted in the conception of the photography medium fostered since the socialist decades. In conclusion, I want to invoke Jake Ranzier's insightful remarks on representation and unrepresentability. He regards representation as an ordered deployment of meaning that defines a certain adjustment of reality. Therefore, unrepresentability only exists within the representative regime of art and highly relative to the heart of the representative order. Therefore, to call for broad conception of realism is first of all to eradicate the appeal to the unrepresentable, and the crucial issue is not to attempt to create new realisms opposed to formalism or objectivism, but to work for new strategy to interrogate the techniques and institutions of representation. Thank you.
Thank you, Aleksandra and Zhou Dengyan, for both giving us really a lot of reflections on the medium as photography, approaching such idea from very extremely different perspectives.
So let's expand.
Yeah, absolutely, because for me, Aleksandra's presentation really takes us through the different stages of her own practice. From her own work as a practicing artist, as someone who works with the medium, that the medium is not only your tool, but also a career of developing your thinking about photography itself. For Zhou Dengyan's presentations, she really takes us into the kind of historical period of photography from the 1920s to 1980s, but especially focusing on the 1960s when photography was really a very contested and important platform for photographers, but also institutions to develop certain visual ideology. What interests me from the very beginning of Aleksandra's presentation was you were saying that you were the starting point of your photography practice was to kind of move away from narrative, or that you wanted, even though you started with a very specific series of documenting your father's resting and eventually passing, but when you really started your photography practice, your career, you work along the path of conceptual photography, what we know as conceptual photography. And in China, actually, in the 1990s, many photographers also took this shift. They deliberately wanted to move away from photography as a medium that documented or that narrative, that convey narratives, convey stories. that look out of the window as you were describing. So I wanted to start by asking you, is there a prehistory of photography that you were moving away from? What was the kind of historical context for you that you were dialoguing with when you started your photography practice?
Yeah, I think right after the school, I moved to States, and I think this was very important shift because the school from which I came was very much positioning us and also labeling us being from that particular school. So I would say that this is very like also locally specific, yeah. So I do react as an artist to a local specific environment that has its own conditions, its own like milieu, its own like microclimate, its own like rules, and it's of course influenced by nearby bigger cities such as Vienna or Berlin. And of course, as well, let's say Poland. That somehow this is the triangle, I would say, and then Prague in the middle. So, and I think also moving to States, I realized I'm a European. This is one very important thing also for me. But then again, I do not belong because being Slovenian, but also being from mixed family, living in Czech Republic, so I don't have roots, yeah, so to say. I am not growing my roots, I'm rhizomatic, yeah, so I'm expanding on a surface, I'm just expanding through another being or culture or content or matter that I touch upon. So, and I think also in States was a super interesting moment that actually allowed me to be in dialogue with the art history, no matter from where I am. And you know, there were like Louis Bourgeois, you know, like you could touch by anyone because the space itself was so multinational. So I was like, oh wow, this is so good because I can just, you know, talk about this practice. Or of course, this was like time of appropriation, yeah, at that time. Like postmodernism was very much like, you know, collecting somehow the visual elements that were in my near surrounding, and then by taking images, I completely stripped those images of its meaning and then making a new meaning, yeah. So this somehow for me, and then returning back, I think also the Czech art scene, I all the time knew somehow that I'm much more interested in photography within a contemporary art context and not as like as photography as it was like normal photography, so to say, or how to call it, yeah. And because it had its own rules and it was very like rigid in a way. So this was the moment, I would say. And then I think at that time my generation became very visible. Not only artists but as well theorists like Vajd, for example, who did like Atlas of Transformation. Maybe you know this book. It's a very important book which actually also defined, somehow there is a correlation to the East Art Map with Slovenia, and I think everyone was trying to really define and contextualize its own regional territory. And I am one of the people who were somehow living in this kind of circumstances. So for me, of course, it's logically I was looking at Julius Kohler, Stano Filko, Jiří Kovanda, Stembera, I don't know, Milan Knizak, you know, these are all these names. I mean, I don't expect you to know those names, but these are the names that somehow had like a very big significance, yeah. So, and it's also like how photography, it's as such, like it is all long life, only 200 years, but it has permanent negotiation with itself and it tries to emancipate, yeah. Photography does have a feeling of being subordinated to another media because it's new, yeah, relatively new. But now this story is maybe not so relevant. But yeah, at a certain point, this was very important narrative, yeah. So that's why also it always combines with another media. It always uses text, it uses drawing, it uses other media to somehow emancipate itself in the space which is non-photographic yeah, gallery space. And right in the moment when it's emancipated in the space, doesn't have this tendency anymore to be combined, to be, to pretend it's something else. It can also be just an image, yeah? And for me, this is all the time super interesting. Like, I really do all the time search also, to make and create one single image that conveys everything, not only content, yeah? Not only content that we can relate to, or it's like, based in, or reflects some kind of reality, but also through all my decisions that are incorporated are becoming part of it already, of the work, yeah? Decisions of size, decisions of paper, decision of surface, decision of how I place it, etc., etc.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on the names that you were citing? You were saying that these were references that you would relate to, but as you were saying also that we have no kind of knowledge of those references. Can you talk a little bit more about how those references, how you relate to those references?
Yeah, because they were all using photography. This is super interesting because I think this is also some kind of moment of with Marina Abramovic, I would say, like she's actually doing performance art, and in 2005 she does like 7 easy pieces in Guggenheim Museum, and she is actually bringing performance into gallery space in a museum, which before was always just, it was in the gallery space, but it was not in a museum space, yeah? And also she's reenacting other performances, which before never happened. And, also like me as an artist, I also grow through the thinking and practice of other artists. And for example, like I would even find a very strange connection and analogy to dance, contemporary dance. In dance, similar things are happening as it's happening in my own artistic practice. Jérôme Bell, for example, yeah. And I was like super interested, like how come this is happening? But I mean, I think it's just tendency. It's not that I'm really searching for something. But what you mentioned, the names, I will go back to your question. Sorry. It's that they were all using photography, but this photography was used for the documentation, but they were also aware of its aesthetics. So it's never only documentation, it's also an artifact, yeah? And this I was also super interested, how, and this is also specific in the Abramovic, yeah? When suddenly she uses, of course, yeah, let's put it aside, yeah, Sean Kelly and, private gallery, and she's in New York, and Sean Kelly is actually, he sees there is like a gold mine of like, for trading and actually putting on the market images that before were only serving as an archive. It was only, documenting the event, the performance. So here for me this was interesting. Well, for example, in Eastern Europe, this was never bankable idea. It was never like thinking in this kind of terms of like commodity or economy, or it was. But for me, they were like, there is also embedded in all these things, performance itself, but also the way it was photographed. It embedded certain kind of poetry, simplicity, modesty, but then highly intellectual. So this for me was important, I think.
Would you say that your photography practice is more situated in the conceptual art history instead of photography's lineage, if there is such a thing?
Yeah, sure. But of course, I'm also aware of like what's happening in photography. Yeah? Like Robert Frank, Diane Arbus, like all these names that Diane Arbus is just like one of them. That I would say it's. For example, it's not a coincidence, that she's representing then as a first woman photographer, as a first photographer, American Pavilion in Venice Biennial in 1971, yeah, or 1972. I think she commits suicide 71. But this is like, because her work, I mean, of course, it also can be related to pop art, like the way how we compose image, not only on a photograph, but also in the canvas and as an object. And yeah, for me, this is once again the question. Because I'm like, what did you ask me?
You were saying that there's specific names of references for your own practice,
No, so,
and I was saying that
mm,
since we're not familiar with those references, would you be able to elaborate for us a little bit?
No, that's what I said.
Yeah.
Like, you know, I think the character of the image it was much more interesting for me than, for example, as photographers we use it. You know, that's all. Like, especially also because photographers. Let's go to Andy Warhol. You know, he's the one who takes image from the archive. He silk screen it, whatever he does with it. Yeah, he puts it on a canvas, but it's a photograph. Yeah. And somebody, you know, he reproduces it. There is a certain seriality with it, and this is somehow placing the image into the non-photographic gallery space, into contemporary art. And I'm all the time interested when these breaks are happening, you know. And then when I mentioned these names, of course they are talking about different things. They're talking about cosmos, planetary, you know, like the Stanofilko, who is extremely like known for that his medium is actually the world, you know, like it's not, the medium is not, we cannot even say what is the medium. So these kind of moments are for me interesting. And then of course I'm like looking, being full of obstacles, full of regulations, as I said, like, you know, size, the way we are producing things, technology, etc. So I'm just like, you know, trying to import this and somehow digest it, metabolize it, and then see what happens at the end. And I like to take risks in this as well. So, and each one of those artists that I mentioned were always having risk embedded, either through politics or, you know, or the art form.
Sure. I want to turn the question a little bit to Dengyan for now. When I inspired by Aleksandra's explanation about her practice and her deconstructive approach to photography, while at the same time constantly looking for ways to inject meaning into this medium itself. For me, even though what you are presenting about Chinese photography practice, both from the state's perspective and from individual photographers' perspectives, it's not so far away from Aleksandra's thinking about photography, because photography for the state and for Chinese photographers in the 1960s was really a very active medium, in the sense that they felt they can use it to articulate their own worldview, and they really went into great length in terms of reinventing this medium, even creating all kind of instruments to enable a certain vision of the world to emerge. So I wanted to ask you how you see photography in that moment in terms of its kind of artistic agency, besides the political and ideological agency that you were elaborating in your paper.
That's a good and tough question. And as we know that historical materials of that decades are relatively difficult to approach, and all the descriptions and comments I gave are according to what I already can access. So I would like to look for more individual, especially those unpublished materials that can allow us to see the complex individual practices and their thinking, only using that medium as photography as a medium to mediate their temporal thinking and their opinions towards what's happening around them by the time. But and for me, it's more. I'm more interested in developing or writing a history of Chinese photography that's not as by production of Western narratives, that or I want it to be as a part of the global histories of art, or global histories of photography. And that's why when I heard Aleksandra's experience, she moves to the States and suddenly open up minds towards the understanding of photography, of arts. And for me, it's the same, but I would, from overseas, I look back to the history and the experience I've over the past 30 years, then it's important for me to kind of voice out. And I think that's important for me too. And
I know you also have some questions prepared for Aleksandra, so here is the moment to.
I appreciate. Thank you very much for showing this, and it's very particularly interesting for me that you really dig deep into the photography's materiality, and that materials doesn't mean the what's in the frame, and that's like a too old cliche. and when you mention that digital age, that becomes the crucial shift of your finding or looking for your own language. I found it particularly interesting for that. And my question would be, I have a lot of questions actually for you. And my question is, how do you conceptualize that medium in your and its materiality in your practice? You talk about you want to go back to or you already go back to the photographic origins, and you play with the mediation of the image, and could you conceptualize what is that materiality of photography in your recent work?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Yes, maybe I went too much fast forward. So, but I think each exhibition, especially at the end, is talking about this conceptualization of the materiality, and also maybe if we can rewind it back to the exhibition in where you could have seen painting on the floor or maybe the painting on the wall. I'm creating basically a photographic organism. Yeah, so I would call it organism because it is a live process. It's a live process, It's not something static. It's not something, as I was talking before in analogy of like it's on a frame, it's behind the glass, it's in the passepartout. No, now it's actually still shrinking, still being active, still changing, still exposing, because they are like living matter. They are living matter which are actually now somehow having its own voice, It's the key opened the voice that was before completely invisible. And for me, this was interesting. Of course, maybe you need to have maybe also a little bit like a poetic mind that you actually could see this beauty in a changing matter, in a chemical process directly. Changing actually on the wall, and but then also it has its own very specific smell because the black surface that you have seen, it's from bitumen. Bitumen was used by Talbot, and he actually mixed it with lavender oil, and then he would fixate it with thiocyan. So basically, all this matter also has its own appearance. Not only that it has haptic kind of seduction for the viewer, you know, because you want to touch it, because it's almost like a relief on the wall, but it also keeps on changing, you know. It has and of course I'm interested also in this kind of aesthetics of it, you know, like how the brush, with what do I apply it, you know. Suddenly it's like this body engagement, not only before as an act, because I was also interested, for example, like maybe this was in the moment of man-woman project, when we are taking pictures of each other. This is also performance. It's not anymore just I'm standing or I'm photographing, yeah? Because photographers, somehow I started to become also aware of this performative act, you know. That's why I'm also then aware of choreography of the viewer or of myself in the space, when I'm in the space, yeah? Especially when I'm actually creating immersive space, when you have to really walk, when you actually in some kind of milieu or ecosystem, however call it, photosystem. But it's not anymore. Of course, this historical point is super interesting for me, but it's very encrypted, you know. The viewer maybe gets completely something entirely else. And this is maybe something that I could see, like maybe the weak point with the last exhibition, where you have it on the floor, the painting, is that I became really aware that all the matter that was there applied, it also has its own voice. As I was before talking, you know, text, its equal partner in the gallery space or in the exhibition. Now for me also the matter has, so I need to somehow also find a way how to more explicitly talk about those substances, those entities.
The text and the verbal languages. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. Another question is right linked to that. Then, for us, we know that the contemporary art and conceptual art, that meaning and ideas are quite different from what we understand the traditional art project practice. So, how do you conceive meaning in your work, or do you give it totally to the audience?
What do you mean, like that the audience creates the meaning, or no?
Or initiate that meaning?
Yeah, I mean, like, how do I engage the audience, or how do I make accessible my work? Yeah.
Or maybe leave the interpretation to.
Yeah.
Do you leave the interpretation
Mhm.
entirely to the audience?
Yeah.
Right, because you mentioned
Yeah.
in one of your projects that you give title to each, or name title to each of the series, right? And some project that you place the text quite like equal to the visual works. So how do you deal with that?
Yeah, and this is good question somehow, because I will take it as a critique. No, but I wanna, yeah, because I am very fanatic somehow, and also unconditional. So I don't think about the viewer, and this is like. It can be bad, yeah, but I also think I could then actually push the radicality of the work forward, you know, because if I would adopt a certain kind of like understanding or, I don't know, knowledge for the viewer, I'm not making progress, you know. I would not make a break. So for me, I'm unconditional, yeah, in that respect. So, but yes, I think that also through time. There is then textual. I also, with every exhibition, it's not that if there is a curator, but I also on my own write a text, you know, for the pieces. So I'm trying to understand what I do, and also I must say that each exhibition comes from the previous exhibition, you know. So there is a process. So for me, I would understand it. It's some kind of this growing, you know, garden that I'm like keeping all the time. It's maintained, yeah. It's super important that you maintain this all the time, even though that many things look so diverse. But I'm still super faithful, you know. I'm so faithful. I'm like really like faithful to the medium. Yeah, even though I like to subvert it, even though I like to disrupt it, even though I like to completely dissect it, you know. So but then I'm interested what comes afterwards, you know? And now I think somehow for me it's interesting. So, wow, okay, so now I'm gonna do exhibition just with frames, you know, what it does now when I'm gonna frame the image again back, you know? Does it change? Is photography coming from the space back onto the wall, did it change? And how did it change? And so this kind of like, so it's also my dialogue with this medium. And then of course, like the viewer, yeah. There is I give all the credit to the curator to make it accessible. Yeah, but I mean, curator usually finds, and I usually like to work with curators that are also not only like strict theorists, but also kind of poets at the same time. Mm-hmm.
I want to jump in a little bit to contextualize Zhou Dengyan's question about leaving the interpretation to the viewers, because this is something that's very common among artists in China in the 1990s. Actually, emerging from the 1990s, there was a huge kind of wave among Chinese artists after 1989 to let go of meaning, let go of narrative content in their work. This has a few reasons. One of the reasons was postmodernism, the influence of postmodernism, the idea of everything goes, the kind of liberating power people find from China in postmodernism, in terms of freeing the responsibility to narrate and to convey ideological meaning. So it's really offer a break from the socialist realist legacy. But as we see it, in a way, it went into another extreme. The other extreme is completely creating something that's very ambiguous and always saying that we are leaving the interpretation to the viewers. So that's why we were asking you this question. But I want to throw this question to Zhou Dengyan as well. Do you see this letting go of meaning in artistic practices, in photography, in a way, a harm or a burden to photography itself in China?
I mean, now, yeah?
Yeah, since then.
Yes, that's one of my worries. And actually, I didn't elaborate the last part that I call as bodily engagement. And I think that that approach, to some extent, means even more to contemporary, to now, especially after the COVID period, that everyone was brought and had no actual connection to the real life. And we artists and our critics, historians, we still can work at home and we still can do virtual, but we feel that need and that urgent to be back to the real life. And I think the artwork and the art, especially those documentaries, not only the photography but the movies also, and we should call for that intervention, right? That to experience with your, like, really the real body, intervene into that what's outside there. Otherwise, everything is just floated in the air and not down to the
gravity.
Right. Yeah, that's what I sense that kind of. But yeah.
Maybe I can continue with Zhou Dengyan's what she was saying, because what she had articulated is actually quite a common anxiety among Chinese art professionals at this moment. One of the kind of anxieties that we have been very much part of the mentality of making art that follows the kind of global contemporary art practices, especially among some artists who are saying that like what you were describing, that in conceptual art practices, you are constantly dialoguing with the medium, with the history of the medium, the legacy and the history of art. But for many artists now, they fear that by working in this way, do we lose an engagement with the reality, with the larger world? How do we still engage with the reality, the physical reality, while thinking conceptually about art? And that really brings me back to what we were discussing before this conversation. You were saying that among practitioners in Eastern Europe, you are not, the art that you're making is not speaking in particular about this reality, but your intellectual thinking is very much in dialogue with the reality, which is that you are trying to kind of imagine a new way of connectivity among all of you to kind of develop a new vision. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that. I wonder if I make myself understood.
No, like you've been touching, like leading somewhere, but I'm just trying to see, I keep on back and forth, like thinking we use the same terms, we use the same vocabulary, but we have completely different environments, yeah?
Exactly.
So then for me, this is like super interesting, like how do I plug on you, or like how can you plug on me and the circumstances that actually produce me. So, and again, I will just talk from my personal experience and the specificity of the space in which I am actually situated at the moment, and which actually I am also somehow, I'm not static, so I'm like really moving a lot, yeah, because I somehow I live between Ljubljana and Prague, and somehow you need to pass Austria, so it's another country. So basically, we are traveling through currencies, through languages, through and as an art. So basically, I don't see it. I'm not. So I just see myself as a human, human on this planet. I'm not conditioning or trying to label myself, neither framing, neither restricting myself. And so maybe this goes back to your question of like, how do I take care of the viewer? And I just need to somehow sustain, so on my own, So this is my character, and so I do perceive this, what you actually were just now trying to say in the work of my students, because they don't have yet this kind of experience. So I am trying to see what actually happened to them, and how they are, and this is back to the materiality of the medium. This is, I think, completely reactionary and symptomatic reaction to the virtual, to the immaterial. And if I'm thinking also in this linearity or in this timeline of my medium, like we are talking about in the beginning, it's materiality, because photography always was one unique piece. It was like daguerreotype, or it was just a paper with salt or something. It was never that it would be reproducible so many times. Yeah. So then, when all these reproduction system mechanisms, and we read Walter Benjamin using aura with this infinite reproducibility. This is something that I'm touching upon as well in the works of. When we were doing it with healing, in this postmodernism, because you need to kind of also take into consideration this kind of character of the medium. And then after this digitalization, again, turn happens. So turn is what? Materiality, boom. So everyone wants to go to the darkroom, and then that's why I started this talk. Like when I moved to States in 2004, already 2003 actually, when I was first at the residency, they were completely like stripping off the dark rooms of equipment and moving into computers. And when I was there back in 2015, back into the digital, back into the dark room again, So, they are again supplying it, because this is strange dynamic which you cannot really predict, yeah. But people, exactly, maybe this was also I had other reasons also why I had to invent my alphabet, but I think this moment when you are actually, when labor becomes part of the work. And this for me was super important, because all the photograms, it's hard labor. You know, only to make one paper and apply color on it takes half an hour. You know, and you think of photography, you know, this really instant, immediate, entity. But no, I wanted to really slow down. You know, I wanted to somehow. I would even say there is, in a way, some kind of erotic moment here, yeah, because I'm touching the paper and I'm all the time negotiating with the paper, because the paper doesn't want to do what you want to do with it, yeah, and so yeah, so there are many. So I can find many different ways how I can actually really always expand through some kind of either work or thinking or. And with the students, somehow I think there is this notion of, we were talking before, of environmental crisis. So they have a, you know, they see the expiration date, you know, it's waiting somewhere there. So this is not open space, meaning like I'm talking about mental space, yeah, not like, so they are like really now fictioning. They're so embedded in world building. Anew, you know, that's why we are all trying to fly out and see down what's going on, and find a solution, because this is maybe also back to death, you know, because if I'm envisioning death, I need to think about life. You know, this is the first work I started the lecture with, you know. So.
You just bring about the issue of students. Yeah, I'm interested. In nowadays, in back your country, do you teach, or other art students will receive historical studies about your own country's art?
History.
Once again?
History, right?
Right. So, because in like for my teaching, usually the students, they know more about global art history, Western art history, than Chinese history of art.
Mm-hmm.
And in your countries, are you like the whole program?
Yes.
Do you apply native history of art to the students?
Yeah,
or,
sure. Yeah, but it's super small, you know.
Right.
So
that's
you do
the same issue.
So, yeah, we have like art history, like contemporary, you know, history, like, you know, we have like different periods that they are taught. But then if you ask me how I teach, like I'm an artist teaching art, but again, I realized that there is no way how you teach art. So I would call that teaching art is in a way as well our artistic practice. It's a medium, you know. So I try to, because we have also like still this Austro-Hungarian system, which means like master apprentice kind of based studios where, of course, we are like actually now using this as a model, but trying to actually look at it as an exemplary model of teaching, and it's serving us as some kind of reference more than actually continuation for teaching. And so for me, then this becomes really open space for anything to happen. So, and I'm the one who needs to create the situation to happen. So, so then this is not so different than, you know, I don't know, performance or theater, or I don't know. I'm just doing it live with the real people in the class. But then, of course, there's another supportive mechanisms, you know, lectures, which are like history, philosophy, aesthetics. We also have ecology now. We have like, yeah, gender studies.
I'm aware of time, so I want to open the floor to the audience for now and see if there are any questions. I can see there's a question.
Okay, thanks for sharing. I have a question for each of you. The first question is for Aleksandra. Your work is quite comprehensive and inclusive. First of all, I saw the pictures of dying father, and then I saw abstract picture about the color combination, and then photographic, materialism, and then experimental installments, and then entities which are human beings. So my question is, is there any coherent logic behind going through all these forms, or they are just separate different forms around us in your artistic career? So that's the question for you. And my question for Dengyan is, would you please define what is the representable, number one, and which genre you think is the best way to convey the unrepresentable? Okay.
Could you just summarize in fast the question for me? Sorry.
You know what? Your work is have lots of different forms, right? Almost includes everything. So I just wonder, is there any coherent logic behind these different forms, or they are just separate stages in your career?
Yeah, no, it's a process. It's continuity. So basically, this is something, and as I said before, also for me, the previous exhibition always plays a role into the next exhibition. So it's completely natural development, and with every new exhibition, I try to overcome what I did before. So I don't repeat. I'm not this kind of artist which. I'm now doing some statement, but I'm going to contradict it in the next answer. But I try to not repeat the certain the exhibitions. But of course, I do repeat it. But in a way, when you move to another space, it's always different show again. Because suddenly that you could have seen there is certain kind of logic or strategy or thinking applied in the space which was you couldn't have known in Bratislava with these filters on the glass, because the space was offering me this, so I could apply the filters. But then in the next exhibition which followed, there were no windows in this gallery space, so I couldn't use this principle. So I had to adopt and find a new solution. And also there's one little thing here, every exhibition has its own problems. Not only my problems as in a creative process, but also production problems. And I realized that more problems there is, better the work it is. It's actually something I came up with, because I really need to so many times confirm my decisions through the problems that occur, and I need to find always the solution. So this all the time confirms my intention. It confirms my gesture. Mm-hmm.
Thank you for your question. And I just put it simple way, but maybe not that comprehensive way. And if we understand a visual work as another kind of language, like a visual language, then representable would be something that's speakable, and unrepresentability would be something that you can describe, you can speak out, or you can precisely describe. So that might be something still in processing, or something that you have multiple answers to one question, or that you cannot take it as a in a total. Right? Yeah, that's a very quick response.
By the way, have you ever heard of Lacan? Lacan defined the unrepresentable as the real. So I just wonder.
It's something that we can never reach out. It's something out there, but we can never reach out.
And we can only reach actively after course we realize there's something unrepresentable.
Right.
Okay. So you did not answer my second question. What genre you think is the best way to convey the unrepresentable?
I mean, that might be in-person activity.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
You're doing work.
Yes.
Yeah. Still always in the movement.
Good.
Any other question to follow? Do you have anything to add?
I don't know what to add to Chinese realism in photography.
Maybe I have a question here. So, cause I
You
study-
need to introduce yourself first.
Sure. I'm the curatorial assistant of Inside Out Art Museum, and I had a question for Aleksandra, also for Dengyan, to talk about like the ambiguity you mentioned before in this discussion. Cause I studied abroad, and ambiguity actually plays a very important role, like in contemporary art, especially in Western art. But people just avoid to talk about ambiguity sometimes, because they feel like ambiguity is like means leave a space for audiences to talk about. Also, like it's a failure to describe yourself very clearly. It's like the two aspects of the ambiguity. So I want to ask, like, do you feel the historical context sometimes it's a limitation of your work, or do you feel like historical context is more discriminated in Western lessons? It's like the continuous question of Mrs. Zhou's question, because I feel Chinese people always like paid a lot of attention to history, like what happened before, and the specific meaning behind the works. But like in Western art fields, especially in Western art schools, people are more pay attention to the ambiguity behind the, to leave a space to like have a core, but like to have a lot of directions or possibilities for audiences to read.
Yeah, but I wouldn't say this is necessarily ambiguity, that you are saying. Because I think behind, also like, okay, now we are making divisions, and of course, again, let's go back, there are differences, yeah, but I would not like to talk about the difference, because art is universal somehow, and of course it has its own, resources and sources and references and stuff, but also me as a pedagogue, I try to navigate the student, not necessarily that it's anchored in something, that it's, because you are trying to say that historical context is somehow anchoring, yeah, it's kind of legitimizes, but I actually would like that the student also overcomes that. I would like that the work overcomes that. I'm not interested. I think this was the rhetoric paradigm of postmodern, and that's why I think also like going to States, this actually liberated me, because I realized I don't need to, excuse all the time myself, I'm coming from this territory, and I don't know, because I'm from Yugoslavia, should I just do war stuff? Because, this is still up to today. You have artists, Danica Dakic, Ela Kameric, there are artists who still are actually talking about the same problem. But I'm not saying this is bad, yeah, because also these artists with this narration, with this theme, are actually overgrowing. They're like completely universal and reinventing all the time the visual language also of a problematic territory. Plus, this territory, speaking of the past, basically means present. We are going back to death and life. So I wouldn't say it's ambiguity, because I found, especially today, there are students super articulated, very, very articulated. And yeah, maybe the work could look like, because I think there's another thing, because there's like a similar aesthetics that, at least where I'm around, like, and we are also very much like influenced by Berlin. So there's this like post-internet, so to call, and post-human and Anthropocene and blah blah. And I'm like, they're just like, cloning these things. There are like certain kind of visual elements that everyone tries to incorporate because they try to learn it, they try to speak. I actually don't. I'm not against it, but because they need to learn the word, they need to learn the language. So for me, this is just like, and it's going to be just the time that is going to show the one that's going to prevail, But I think they are aware also what they are doing, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree.
I just want to know, do we need to break out of this vocabulary? This learning the visual from Berlin, the visual from New York, the kind of so-called global art world, this visual vocabulary. You were saying that we are kind of cloning and
yeah. I mean, you know what? I'm like here. My explanation is very, very simple. Let's go back to organism and to living matter and metabolism and to the growth and proliferation. So I think each proliferation actually also has a moment of mutation, you know, when the break happens. And this is going to be the break at a certain kind of point, you know, but you have many artists which we can look back, you know, Joseph Beuys, I don't know, you know, many artists who actually were able to do that, you know, to do this kind of break in some kind of linearity but there is no linearity anymore, you know, we are so hypertextual, you know, so I don't know, like I don't think that the break is, you know, I all the time think like, okay, also like for example with the non-artist speaking partners in dialogue, I am trying to, in order to collaborate, I'm applying educational principles, pedagogical principles of how actually we apply in the students. And then I'm thinking, wow, we are so institutionalized as well, you know, like how, but then how should we then lead the conversation, you know, in order for something to happen? So these are actually then the moments for me how I can maybe subvert this moment, yeah? Because it's always about each individual, you know. I am not the one who keeps repeating. I try to, you know, you said I don't have consistency, but I do try to contingency, but I try to all the time maybe surprise myself. So also when I called before, like, okay, cloning, combining ceramics with paper, this is so unusual a moment, you know, like, and so that this is like one object, you know, it's a one sculpture, it's like a one entity. It's not just that I'm like playing something, yeah. But so I do go into the situations when I can, when I actually like can learn something from it, you know, and change it. And I think only from work this is going to happen. So only from work is going to happen the turn. The glitches. We need the glitches.
Absolutely. I think with that great answer, we're gonna close the conversation today. I want to thank all of you for your patience, and I'm still in shock that we can actually have this conversation in live. So thank you again to the Embassy of Slovenia for putting magic, and please join us tomorrow on live again.
Yes, thanks again for Embassy of Slovenia, Alenka Suhadolnik, for making this happen, and thanks and I'm happy you two met, so this actually
and our conversations will continue.
Season. Exactly.
Thank you.
Thank you for everything.
Thank you. That's like a picture in the
是不是应该着重你的脸啊？你纪录片也有，那个故事也有，然后人物也有，你是不是专注一点会更好一点？
因为这个套盒是本身是比较大
小
也
小的一块，这就不是演出。
然后我又想让这个不是中国观众
对，
所以我就只有10分钟，然后我就不停的把东西堆在上面，你们看。